Welcome to the Doctor's Eyes Only podcast, brought to you by Vestia Personal Wealth Advisors, where we are on a mission to help the highest caliber physicians achieve wealth that matters.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Doctor's Eyes Only podcast. I am your host for today, Lauren Oschman, and I am here with a guest that I have been very excited to bring to you, Dana Jacoby. She is a national thought leader in healthcare and business with extensive experience in private equity and mergers, especially in the healthcare space. She's guided her own companies through multiple transactions and consulted on billions of dollars in deal flow. Dana's career spans multiple roles at major healthcare corporations like GE, Johnson & Johnson in the pharmaceutical sector. She actually played a key role in launching Botox in Asia, which is a fun little fact. Her work includes strategies and service delivery for medical practices and health systems across the U.S. and internationally. She's very committed to philanthropy, providing medical relief worldwide with various organizations, holds advanced degrees from LSU, Tulane, and the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey, and she serves on multiple corporate boards. I was actually initially introduced to Dana through my partner and Vestia president, Brad Quick, who longtime listeners will recognize, having heard him host the show in the past. I had a client who's an orthopedic surgeon whose practice had done a deal with private equity previously. Things weren't going super well. And so me being the problem solver and wanting to help, I was like, there has to be someone who has expertise in this space and who can help them figure out what to do. Because here we had this group of doctors that did not have experience in this space. They were in a situation that was not good for themselves collectively, financially, or individually, and they just needed some insight. So Brad connected me with Dana. In that process, we actually discovered that private equity had gotten very involved in cardiology. I had a group of cardiologists that most of the group were clients of mine. They were in a situation trying to negotiate for a new contract with their hospital system in a community where they actually didn't have a plan B. And so the hospital kind of knew that the doctors had to take the best deal they put in front of them. And I had already been thinking, if only they had an alternate option or like another deal that they could bring to the table, the hospital might recognize their actual value. And so I had reached out to Dana. We had done a valuation of the practice, looked at what private equity would pay to get those physicians on their platform. That provided a really good competing offer for the doctors. The doctors did end up deciding to stay in the hospital system, but they got a much better deal than what was on the table for them before we introduced this other option. So I have been really excited to get Dana on the show because what I have heard from doctors is really just kind of anecdotal experience. Doctors have either been in a private equity deal themselves, and so they have experience with this is going great for us, or it's not. Doctors that have been kind of at an arm's length from private equity and maybe only vaguely understand it tend to have kind of anecdotal observation that it's not a good thing. And so I thought it would be great to have someone like Dana, who is not private equity. She consults with physician groups and with physicians on private equity deals, to just give us an introduction to what private equity is. I'm going to ask questions that have come from physicians that we work with and try to get some of the, let's peel the layers back and understand what doctors should be considering, because I do think that there are places where private equity can be a good solution for certain challenges that physician groups face. How do we make sure that we ask good questions, go in eyes wide open to do a good deal versus do a deal that might accomplish financial goals in the short term, but sacrifice on other goals of physicians in the longer term? So that was a very long-winded introduction, but hopefully gives us like a little level set for where we want to start today. Welcome, Dana. I'm so glad to have you.
Lauren, it's an honor. Thank you guys for hosting this. And thank you so much for continuing to create good education, because you nailed it in the intro. There's so much to talk about on this one topic. So very excited to be here.
Yes, I'm so happy to have you. So before we dive into asking some more of the questions about private equity, I shared some very high level about your background, but maybe paint the picture for us. What role do you play in this realm of private equity and healthcare and physicians?
Yeah. So I have been educating and working with doctors for over 2 decades, which is a lot, a long time now. But a long story short, Lauren Vector Medical Group, which is the company I founded, was stood up because I had actually gone through a private equity transaction myself. I had gone through a first bite and a second bite. We can talk about bites, but I owned a medical market research firm and consulting strategy firm and had the luxury of having a private equity firm acquiring it. Well, when all of that happened and I went through the process twice, I realized how little I knew about things and decided to literally donate the rest of my career to standing up Vector and really being an advisor that's not an investment banker and not a strategist that's paid on the transaction, but somebody that really is focused on creating the right education for physicians. Because to your point, a lot of what happens is anecdotal stories at the water cooler at ACC or AAOS. And instead, I wanted doctors or founders to have a safe place to call, much like Vestia.
Yeah.
I mean, very, very similar on what you
Yeah.
guys do for a living as well.
Yeah, I was actually thinking that you're paid, and this has always been very important to me when we engage with physicians. I'm like, I want you to know where we're getting compensated and how we're getting paid. And you're
Right.
clear that that is you paying us. It is
Right.
not us getting paid from other sources by putting you into certain investments, things like that. And you're
Right.
structured very similarly because I know we've worked with some physician groups together where they are paying you for your expertise, for your time to put good information together for them. So I think that's really important to understand kind of where you fit in this world. And I love that you took your experience and are now looking to pay this forward. Because I've heard so many founders, not just in medicine, but outside, who have said, there was so much I didn't know. I made the biggest decision of my professional life. And there was so much that I didn't know until I had already signed everything.
Right.
And
It's the
that's not the
biggest
position you
thing.
want to be in.
That's the biggest thing, Lauren, is people don't realize there's so much pregame. And if you start to learn while you're in the deal, there's just not enough. I mean, there's entire industries dedicated to this, right? There's deal flow attorneys, there's investment bankers, there's quality of earnings firms that do accounting. So if you think all of a sudden, and I tell the doctors, you get one shot at this. I mean, maybe your business sells a multitude of times, but that's first opportunity you've worked your whole life for. Why all of a sudden try to coach up in the deal? So it's really important to get educated pregame.
Yeah, that's
Totally.
such a good analogy. It's like think about football teams. I mean, any kind of sport, right? It's like, I know you're a marathoner. I remember one of the most fascinating nuggets. I don't know if fascinating is even the right word for it, but I still remember this when I was looking you up before we had our first meeting. You've run 60 some marathons, one in every state, and I think one on every continent.
But except Antarctica. Antarctica was supposed to be during COVID, Lauren, and they offered me,
Oh
I
my
had this
God.
sweatshirt, they offered that I could run it on a treadmill. And I was like, no,
No, I actually wanted to go to Antarctica.
not the same as seeing penguins. But anyway, that is still we'll see if it gets accomplished. But
Oh
Antarctica
my
was
gosh.
the one
I'll
that,
keep my fingers crossed you get that opportunity. But I mean, when you're running a race, right? I mean, you're not the time that you figure out whether or not you can run
that's
26.2
right.
miles is not when you get on the course,
That's
right?
exactly.
It's all of the buildup that you do to that race day. And so
That's
it's very similar, right? If you're playing football, if you're playing basketball, you're going through practice so that it's muscle memory, you know what to do in the game. And so I love that analogy, thinking about like, don't learn in the deal. Like, don't learn when you already signed the papers. I mean, that's a little bit terrifying when you think of it that way.
Well, it's that one, and I think there's a misconception that if you start down the path of an exit, everybody's going to exit somehow, some way, someday, right? You're either going to leave your business from a succession standpoint to relatives, or you're going to have a life event, or you're going to get bought out, or you're going to sell. So I think there's a misconception if you do the pregame, you have to get married by Friday, and there's a lot of things leading up to, hey, I might want to exit one day. Let me just get, and you gave the great example of the doctor group that thought they might want to renew with a hospital. They just wanted to look at all their other options. They ultimately ended up renewing with a hospital with an added value, right? They knew their worth. But it doesn't mean you have to get married by Friday if you start down the path of estate planning, or, I mean, there's just so many
Such
things
a
you
good
can
point.
do before
Yes.
you're in a transaction versus trying to catch up, to your point, at game time moments.
But if I'm thinking about the physicians who are listening, let's maybe back up. Like, what is private equity? when people say like, oh, PE is getting involved or their practice sold to PE or, hey, maybe we should think about private equity here. What is private equity and what does that even mean? They sold
Right.
to PE.
Right. So it's funny. It's funny you ask, Lauren, because I was in a partner meeting last week and they kept saying, oh, the venture capital firm. And then they'd switch back and say the private equity. And I said, wait, those are very different things. So private equity, all your listeners need to know that are physicians is private equity is private money. So think about that. Just think about the words private money. And it's usually high net worth individuals. So think either pension funds or very wealthy family offices, people that invest much larger than the average investor in the stock market. And they're investing in things that are private, so outside of stock market, private businesses that they hope are going to return a profit in 3 to 7 years and hopefully for a return that's going to beat the market ultimately. And so it's off balance sheet money, Lauren, of very high net worth individuals. One of the things that I think is important for your listeners, the doctors to know is a lot of them, even though they have a high net worth because of their salaries, don't always have access to investing alongside of folks like a pension fund or a family office or, a Walton Rockefeller type of group would. So that's one of the benefits of private equity, but it's just private money set aside to basically create a return, usually in 3 to 7 years of very high net worth individuals. And they're usually in funds. So you'll hear private equity firms there, they're going to raise a fund and they go out and get a lot of capital and then look for ideal opportunistic businesses to invest in that they think they can turn a successful profit with in under usually 10-year period of time.
If we're familiar with the concept of a mutual fund, which is a bunch of different stocks you can open up your computer to Vanguard or Fidelity and you can choose a fund of stocks. Private equity, the way I'm understanding your explanation. Yeah, it's not listed on the computer anywhere, so it has to be done. That's the private piece of it. It has to be done privately, but there often is a fund, right? So they may be investing in several medical practices as a part of that fund, and so chunks of that money are going into different medical practices. They are making that investment because they think that they're going to get a good return on that. The business is profitable, it's generating good cash flow, and so they think then they can sell that in the 3 to 7 year time frame, and they can realize a good profit to pay out the people in the fund.
That's exactly right, Lauren. And I think you nailed one of the things that we always ask for the private equity. If a doctor's listening to this and saying, hey, I just had Joe Smith from Private Equity X call me, have they invested in other healthcare entities? Are they in storage units and now they want to get into doctors' offices?
Yes.
And the whole idea behind this is, can you acquire a lot of businesses and create economies of scale so that you can maximize the return? So if every doctor's office has a billing person and every doctor's office has an administrator and every doctor's office has a, EMR that they're paying service fees on, can you roll a lot of that up and make a return? But that's you nailed one of the things we ask doctors to find out is this private equity Joe just coming in, thinking, oh, cool, we'll just get into healthcare. Same thing. You don't want to coach up.
And I referred you a doctor, if you remember, that happened to her. There was a very wealthy investor who was like, I want to get healthcare in my portfolio, was trying to put together a fund of healthcare investments, medical practices, had never done this before.
Right.
And so he actually put a really attractive dollar amount in front of her where she was like, I have to do this. Like, I have worked so hard. She's built an incredible practice. I'd actually seen her start it, sign the lease on the space.
Absolutely.
Start with one employee. She's built it into a thriving practice. And that was my first thought was, you don't want to sell your baby, your professional, but you don't want to sell your baby to someone who has no idea what they're doing in healthcare. Right. That could go very, very wrong. And I mean, yes, you'd have a lot of money, but I think most founders, it's not only about that, right? They care a lot about, and doctors have gotten into medicine because they care about their patients. Absolutely. Doctors are not thinking about the business first and foremost, in my experience. And so they're not looking to leave what they started and grew with their own blood, sweat, and tears to someone that could grossly mismanage it. And so I think that's a great question for those listening who may think about foraying into this, may hear, friends talking about like, oh, we've got PE interested. Do they have experience in healthcare? And what have those will those practices provide a reference
Right.
for what the experience has been like on the other side of the deal?
That's exactly right, Lauren. And not that it can't happen. I mean, I don't want to be, there are people, everybody has to get a start somewhere, right? But
Yes,
that's
for sure.
definitely a good question. And don't just call the list of doctors that somebody gives you, really do your due diligence. So we could do a whole show just on that part of it because there's
Yeah.
so much, but
We may have to have you back.
that's right. Exactly. We have checklists, believe me, but get really educated. Private equity can be a very beneficial thing, but you have to pick the right partner. And to your point, highest bidder isn't always the best deal. Culture counts, and culture really counts once that wire transfer has already occurred.
So what is actually driving the fact? I mean, because private equity is not new in healthcare. This started, I mean, I remember years ago, there were GI groups that were selling to private equity. It seems to me like specialty interest kind of goes in waves, right? It's like the GI groups did it and the radiology groups did it. And now it's orthopedics and it's cardiology. And, so we're seeing things kind of morph over time in terms of where the money is focused on specialty. Is that an accurate perception? Or has private equity involvement in medicine picked up in recent years? And that's why we're hearing so much about it. And I guess what's driving that? Like what's driving that interest in healthcare?
Yeah. So private equity has been in healthcare or in physician practices for years, to your point, Lauren. It started with, ophthalmology and dermatology and to your point, radiology. There were a handful of deals pre roll up that actually were very productive as an aggregate. There were some winners and some losers, but as an aggregate, they were very productive and good exits. So that's always a good qualifier for financial folks of, hey, we made a good return. Your question is very interesting just because right now there has been a massive interest in healthcare from a private equity. And I would say high net worth investor lens, not just PE. We see family offices coming into healthcare. We see other folks, but there's a lot of reasons. There's no one smoking gun. One is the average age of a doctor in the United States is over the age of 55. So, and we're not minting enough physicians to replace the ones we have. So if you think about if I'm a doctor and I own my practice and I'm 50, 56, 58 years old, I may be thinking I might want to take some chips off the table for the future, right? So private equity has had a lot of money from COVID and from other things that they've had opportunistic investment opportunities. That's one reason. Some of the younger doctors that we interview, because you'll hear, oh, this is just the old doctors cashing out, right? The young doctors, though, we talk to, Lauren, they're coming out with $250 to $300K in med school debt. They have high-end houses. A lot of them are two-income families, and it's not a knock. I always joke my grandfather was a doctor, and I mean, on record, my grandma's number one job was to take care of my grandfather. That was her job at the time. It's a different world now. So when you talk to the younger doctors, they a lot of times don't want to be in partner meetings till 10:30 at night. They want to be home with their families more. So there's kind of this generational thing happening as well. And then the third thing is there's an opportunity for outpatient and a lot of shifts in healthcare to ambulatory surgery centers, OBLs, and cardiology. So you've got this opportunity to invest. So it's kind of this perfect thing. No one's smoking gun, but we've seen pre-COVID 59% of doctors being employed by someone, hospital, health system, private equity. That number as of today, Lauren, is around 78%.
Wow. In just 3 years.
Pre-COVID. So, I mean, 2019.
Maybe more like 5 years. Still staggering.
Your question is a telling one. From 2020 to 2024 was when the bulk of that happened, just because COVID, and I was an independent doctor, and then I had to shut my clinic and wear an N95 and patients, and I realized for the first time in my career how vulnerable I was. And so that was a big qualifying. We took things that we had planned for in healthcare from a strategy standpoint for 10, 15 years. We compressed them into 3-4. So very interesting. Wow. So anyway, no one's smoking gun, but therein lies the interest. Private equity had a lot of money post-COVID. Physicians were burnt out. They needed help. They needed, the ability, and it just created the perfect opportunity for co-investment opportunities to move forward.
There's so much to unpack here. I could go so many directions from where we just went. I think I have also experienced advising individual physicians exactly what you're saying, which is doctors' goals changed a little bit coming out of COVID, particularly those in private practice. So even those who weren't necessarily in the, frontest of frontline specialties, but who found that all of a sudden they were like, I never imagined that there would be a 3-month period where I wouldn't be able to do procedures.
Right.
And meaning that we don't have money coming in.
Right.
Right. And so saying, oh my gosh, we had to step up as business owners. And again, doctors get into medicine because they want to deliver great patient care, not usually because they want to run and grow a business.
Right.
So I guess my question coming out of that, because the reason that I have not been totally closed as doctors are like, oh, I know so-and-so who had a terrible experience with private equity. There's a problem that private equity solves in the physician market. And so you kind of mentioned this older physician who wants an exit. Previously, it was like, is the hospital an interested buyer? Yes or no? If no, there's not a ton of value to that medical practice because those patients are just going to go somewhere else. So without that doctor providing the care, there's not really something for someone else to buy. Absent private equity, who's doing this with multiple medical groups who can hire and staff and grow based on the foundation that you've already created. So I guess what are those challenges that you see? Like, if I'm a physician who has a private practice, like what are those things where I might be saying, maybe I should see if private equity would be interested. This could help us solve the problem. Is it operation of the business? Is it purely just I need someone who wants to buy so that I can get something for what I have built? Are there other scenarios where private equity might be a solution?
Yeah, this is honestly, Lauren, nightly. I have this conversation with doctors. I mean, literally nightly with doctors groups. So remember, we go through COVID, right? In 2020, I'm exhausted as a doctor. By the way, you and I got to somewhat do what we're doing now, right? We got to Zoom. A lot of our physicians were in person, N95 masks. You come out of that, all of a sudden, inflation goes up, staffing costs go up. Reimbursement, by the way, at that same time goes down anywhere from 2 to 5% year over year. Most of the specialists I serve, it's on average of 4%. So Dr. Lauren and Dr. Dana are working, and then we're like, hey, Lauren, the future is ambulatory surgery centers. I want us, even though we're losing money and paying more for staffing and paying more for supplies, let's go build an ambulatory surgery center. Well, now I need you to personally guarantee that alongside of me. And that it's all of a sudden we're off to the races.
Yeah, we have to go get a loan. And so we have to put our families in more financial potential distress or just under stress, I should say, not even distress, but like under stress to say, hey, I'm going to take out this multi-million-dollar loan to build this surgery center because reimbursements are higher there. We can do more procedures there. We can control our staffing there. And so this is going to fix our problems. But you're right, that's very daunting, especially when you just went through kind of a totally unforeseen era of as an owner of a medical practice.
And you're looking at January where you're going to lose 4% again next year. And it's not like if you're a surgeon, it's not like you're seeing 30 patients a day and you can see 37. If you're, I mean, you're at economies of scale. And unless you can figure out, even if everybody in your practice is playing at the height of their licensure and you're really running an efficient practice. I mean, I talk to doctors every single day, Lauren, literally, I'm in partner meetings almost nightly. And I don't know how long we can keep this going on our personal guarantees. And by the way, all the other themes we mentioned, not enough doctors to replace the ones that are retiring. I mean, it's just so, bookending it. There's a ton of stuff going on that are headwinds. If I'm a physician and all of a sudden I find a good equity partner, I might be able to build that ambulatory surgery center with somebody else's capital. Or they may be able to get a better rate on a loan than I could go get even though our physicians are very successful, going to the bank next door or down the road versus going to a corporatized bank when I have that kind of capital across my portfolio. It's just different rates, different. I feel for our doctors. I mean, I do. I struggle with them every night of, Can they stay independent? If they don't stay independent, who is the right strategic alliance or partner? If it's not private equity, is it the hospital? Is it someone else in their wings? But these are real themes that you hear nightly, even from our most successful from our most successful private groups that aren't equity backed. They're all going through some challenges.
Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing you say, and this kind of goes back to that conversation where we first really worked together with that cardiology group, which is like, if you are feeling this stress, especially the financial stress, maybe getting some outside perspective to say, hey, here are some options that are not just continue to bootstrap, continue to put in more and more hours, continue to forego more and more pay to the partners to cover the increased staffing costs, et cetera, et cetera. There are other solutions probably out there. So if I'm thinking about this, because this is daunting, right? If I'm like, I've always had control. Like I've always had control. I've always been able to put the patient first. Think about the patient experience. If if patients are having bad experience, I can change things because I'm in control. So how do you go about finding a partner that is going to value the same thing I do as a doctor?
Yeah. So, one, get educated, Lauren, to your point. Call your Vestia folks, call an advisor, if you're a big enough group, get an investment bank or somebody involved early in the process. The most critical aspect of what you're asking, though, is get a good deal flow attorney. And this is not your attorney that wrote your operating agreement. In most states across the United States, there is a corporate practice of medicine law on the books, which means that a private equity firm or a financial entity cannot come tell doctors how to practice clinically. That said, we have a situation right now where they didn't memorialize their vacation. They didn't memorialize their productivity, right? I mean, you have to be very specific in legal documents as to what you're trying to protect. So getting advisors in early and being very clear about, look, it's a negotiation a lot of times if you're selling your business in any business, is private practice. So really understand what you're willing to leave on the cutting room floor, if anything, versus what you want memorialized in those documents. And you don't have to be a lawyer, but you can say, hey, these are the things that are breakable.
These are my non-negotiables. Like I have to do these things.
100%. And a good deal flow attorney, again, there are specific attorneys that do this for a living. This is not your attorney that does your divorce or
great advice.
You need somebody that really understands the vernacular. And in an ideal world, again, somebody who has healthcare transaction advisory. It's not just storage units, not just that kind of thing.
Right.
So
well, that goes back to, there's a similar theme to an earlier question that you suggested we ask, which is what experience does this particular partner, private equity platform have in healthcare? I'm seeing a common theme. What kind of experience do you have in these kinds of healthcare deals? Because there are attorneys out there that have that experience. And that could be the difference between you ending up with a good contract with good protections for the physicians versus having a not great contract that's much more favorable to the investor.
Absolutely, Warren. My two worst deals that didn't consummate themselves last year, one was a naive investor to healthcare, and they typical, just like your client that we talked about, they were throwing big numbers around without really understanding what they were buying. That deal ultimately fell through in the end zone. The other one, the doctor group had an attorney that truly was not up to snuff, and they were not healthcare orientation. They were not transaction orientation. We knew. You can tell by the way people present themselves. Have they done this before? Do they have case studies? And again, the deal didn't get consummated in the end zone just because the terms were too far apart and they weren't even speaking the same language. The deal flow attorney was not ready for prime time in the healthcare advisory space. There are very specific things for doctors: non-competes, restrictive covenant. Their livelihood is
you said corporate practice of medicine.
Corporate practice of medicine. There's a whole vernacular attached to healthcare mergers and acquisitions. So that's really, and I always tell clients of mine, even if you don't hire me, find a really, really good healthcare attorney, because that's a pivotal role in your deal flow team.
Physicians, I see this a lot when they're negotiating just them as an employee of a hospital deal, not even as a group, but then, as groups. I think physicians are, for whatever reason, used to being in the position where they don't ultimately have the power, right? They're like, well, this is the best the hospital is going to give us, so I have to deal with it. Or like, oh, this is, and so they don't really think about themselves as bringing the value to the table and being
Right.
able to be strong on those non-negotiables. And so I love what you're saying about having an attorney that knows what they're doing, but also you probably need someone hyping you as
Right.
a physician to be able to say you are the reason they're interested in. Again, medical practices don't usually have inherent value unless you own real estate, unless you own, like, the value is the doctors
That's right.
and the great patient care that they deliver. And so without the doctors, there is not an attractive asset to invest in or to buy.
That's
And so
right.
going to the table very clear on what those non-negotiables are is you should do that. That's not
Right.
like, hey, this is a suggestion. You should do that. And if
Right.
you don't feel comfortable with those final terms, then that might be a reason to walk away from the deal.
Right. No, absolutely. Well, and our doctors, Lauren, I mean, they went into patient care to your point for a reason. The Hippocratic Oath is a real thing. You didn't go to school like an attorney did to fight impunity for your clients' desires or needs. It's a lot easier when you're not emotionally attached to the outcome to negotiate
So
really,
true.
really hard. So I feel for our doctors that try to do negotiations and finance and law. And it's again, there's just too much here to coach up in the deal. And you'd be surprised, to your exact point, it's a human capital intensive business. So
Mhm.
doctors have a lot more authority and control in a negotiation than a lot of times they realize, whether it's
Yes,
with a hospital or a private equity,
absolutely.
because you lose them, we're not minting five more to replace them. So they
Right.
really do have the upper hand a lot more than they go for it in the negotiation. So I totally agree with you. I think that's a big lesson that your listeners could learn from this podcast. So
Yeah, build a great team that is worth
world
the
of
money that you are going to pay to
a
assemble that
hundred
group.
percent, a hundred
So,
percent. It's 2020. Once you
yeah,
realize, kind of looking back, what went wrong or good, it's
yeah,
you can't learn it like you can a case study in med school. So
yeah, for sure. So what is the value? You alluded to this earlier, right? So we talked about the money, right? They can help you fund building that ambulatory surgery center, taking the risk off of your plate, things like that. When it comes to the actual operation of the business, because that's another piece you're talking about, physicians often want to separate themselves from that. They're like, I want to be a full-time doctor. I
right.
do not want to run a business and hire staff and, answer their demands for more pay and, all of that. What does the private equity partner, a good private equity partner for a medical practice, what of that responsibility are they taking off of the physicians?
Yeah, usually, Lauren, on the business side, usually a lot of it. We interview a lot of our doctors on the deals that have gone really well, and they say, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm not doing payroll after hours. I'm so glad I'm not chasing accounts receivable or having, Nurse Betty or whoever, John, the office administrator, be there till 12 at night." Medicine has gotten really, really complex. Cybersecurity. Who knew big group needed
Oh my
cybersecurity?
gosh.
But these are very expensive, very complex things. So the lens that a private equity group or team can bring in on revenue cycle management, cybersecurity, just kind of the bits and bytes of the business behind healthcare. Those are the things that when you really talk to doctors, very few of them love that part of it. They want to practice medicine. They want to be with their patients. They don't really want to be doing accounts receivable at 10 o'clock at night after hours
Right.
so that, I think, the investment in more efficient systems, better administrators. And it's not, you may have a phenomenal administrator that was with you when you were a group of 5. Well, now you're a group of 50. Does that person coach up to that same skill set? These folks have a very sophisticated Rolodex of people that they basically can bring forward. So there's a lot there on the business behind the business. On the clinical side, doctors usually know. I ask almost all my groups, if I gave you $100 million, what would you do with it? They all know. They all know what they want to do. They want to build. They want to grow. They're entrepreneurs. They went to med school to
Yeah.
create better systems. It's having access to that capital for the things they want to put into place on the clinical side also becomes real because they
Yeah.
actually have capital to play with.
Well, that's exactly right. If you're swinging with someone else's money, if you're like, I'm 80+% certain that this would work, and unlock a whole nother level for our practice.
That's
But
right.
if it's the money of 5 doctors that has to foot the investment to realize that, you might not actually do it versus when you have money that you can, and that's what they want, right? They want the return.
We have some groups. One doctor's about to retire. One doctor has $300K in med school debt. We'll go years having the same partner meeting. And I'm like, guys, at this point, we're going to make a decision by Friday. And even if we do nothing, it's better than having the same partner meeting again for the 18th time. It's hard. It's really hard to get out of your own way as a business owner. I get it. I am one. I mean, you live here too. It's hard to decide where you want to invest when it's a finite group of money you're playing with.
If I'm thinking about what happens after you've done the deal, a lot of times doctors are keeping some money in the platform, right? So they get a payout, and it can be it can be a multi-million-dollar payout. They're getting a payout that's for the purchase of their practice. They're getting a salary from the platform. Then, so they've sold the business. They're no longer business owners. They are now salaried employees of the private equity platform. But again, they got multi-million dollars usually to put to work in their portfolios to kind of make up that gap. Then some of their money stays back in the deal for, you referenced it earlier, this second bite. So can you kind of explain in plain English, like what is happening if I'm a doctor, I've been bought out by private equity, I got my first $2 million check, $3 million check, whatever, I've invested that, and then I have some money back in the deal. What's happening after that?
Yeah. So, traditional deal, and to your point, Lauren, a lot of these deals are multi-million. I mean, the multiples or the amount of money doctors have been paid up front has been sizable. It's been a great story for a lot of doctors that, to your earlier point, upon retirement would just get their accounts receivable and there's no gold watch. You're done. You're out the door. So let's just say you and I transact and we get $5 million up front, just easy money. Usually the private equity firm, if you're not about to retire or you're not 1 foot out the door for one reason or another, you want to stay in the business, they would like for you to roll back anywhere from, it could be 15 to 30%. It can be more or less, but usually it's 20 to 30%. So $5 million, we rolled back a percentage of that, a fifth of that back into the platform. And I know, just a quick change of vernacular, but yes, you become an employed physician, but you're also a shareholder now in a mutual.
Yeah, great clarification.
In a much bigger deal than just, okay, I own my practice. Well, that's great. But we are on the brink of Tampa being, unfortunately hit by a hurricane. What if that happens in your backyard? What if you go through COVID? So
you're diversifying a little bit.
Diversifying. You got it. The idea, if you remember from the beginning of the definition of private equity, a private equity firm wants to take that money or take your shares, the money you rolled back, the fifth that you rolled back, and ideally create a return of 3 to 4 times that money. So if you roll back $1 million, that, if they do their job right and create economies of scale and create that next exit, could be 1 times 3 or 1 times 4.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where, for our younger doctors, when they say, oh, what's in it for us? Is this just the old people cashing out? The mature doctors, I should say, cashing out. Some of our younger doctors, if they play their cards right, could get, assuming they're a partner, but could get a certain amount of money up front on their first exit, roll back $1 million or $2 million into the deal, get a second exit. And some of these groups that have been around, the ophthalmic deals or the dentistry deals or the derm deals, you have doctors that have gotten upwards of 3 or 4 bites, which is incredible. And sometimes those platforms, if they truly mature to that next level, could go public. If they keep, after a while, you get to a point where there's no big private equity to buy you, that you're so big, you need to go public on the exchange. But that's a real thing, Lauren, for some of our younger physicians that are thinking, man, I'm a partner. I've got a huge buy-in to become a partner. How do I ever get my money back? And is this really going to pay itself forward, where when I retire, get my accounts receivable? That doesn't sound like that great of a deal. If I don't own real estate or an ancillary, to all the other things that you mentioned, that's a very real scenario for some of our younger doctors who have benefited from private equity investments.
healthcare. Well, and that's a great point, because I think that is one of those things that you hear, right? That's just the old doctors wanting to monetize their hard work to build the practice, and then the younger doctors kind of get hosed in that deal. And so I love your points about make sure that you structure a good deal. Make sure that you are part of that conversation if you're a younger doctor. So, and this is something that we will help with when we will help with contract negotiation for those
Absolutely.
younger doctors. What happens if in that first 2 years that you're an associate, before you've bought in as a partner, what if the group sells to PE?
Right.
Because I had a radiologist who got cut out of one of those deals.
Mhm.
And that is not, I mean, there's bad blood for a long time after that. And he just didn't ask the right questions up front because they didn't foresee that kind of transaction happening. So
Right.
hearing some of the data that you're sharing, Dana, saying private equity is very much here in healthcare. And so if I'm a doctor who's joining a private practice today as an associate who is going to have the opportunity to buy in 2 years or 3 years, I'd be asking that question, and I'd be looking to get some kind of protection in the contract so that I'm not cut out of the deal. Or at the very least, I am part of the conversation, because
Uh,
I will have to be okay with the terms of that deal to be employed then by that platform. And the financial upside is there, to your point. You just have to understand the mechanics of how that works and understand kind of the risk that you're taking in transitioning the way that that return is earned.
I agree, Lauren. As a matter of fact, it's interesting, but in the last year, I've had 3 different practices, same scenario, all younger doctors that brought us to the table, by the way. An ENT group, a neurosurgery group, and an orthopedic group. The younger doctors, upon close, actually were trued up into partnership. Now they have to be I mean, you can't just show up on day one. Although we did have one very successful young doctor who did show up on day one and actually got a bonus in the deal
Oh,
because
wow.
while he was being groomed by he could have gone pretty much anywhere. He could have gone
Okay.
academic. I mean, but so I don't want to use that as the case study, but I'm just saying
You're
somebody in
saying
the
it's possible.
it is possible. And
It
for
is
a younger
possible.
doctors, everything is possible. It's all negotiations. But for younger doctors, some of the deals we've done in the last year, the junior doctors didn't want to buy in or couldn't buy in or didn't have the capital to buy in. They were able to become partner upon close in order to keep the platform going. And so there's a lot of different structures for younger physicians that exist. Again, they need to get educated. They need to get advisors. I would assume if I were a younger doctor, just knowing the statistics of how many doctors groups are employed by
Mhm.
someone now, we actually taught last year in 14 med schools. You need to get educated about what that looks like and how to go into those negotiations. And I was fascinating some of the younger doctors in class. I mean, the questions they were asking about private equity, they were much, much more educated than I
Yeah.
thought. It's because it's part of their reality moving forward as younger
Right.
physicians.
Well, and there's so little it shouldn't make you feel inferior if you don't understand these things as a physician. You don't get education on finance and business. You get education on the body and on medicine and on you are the best there are at what you do. There are other people out there like Dana who's saying I'm having conversations nightly with
Literally,
groups of physicians. I've seen probably hundreds of these deals, either
right,
firsthand or, 1 degree of separation with your team. And so going to someone that has that experience, again, this is the biggest professional decision you probably will make.
right.
It's going to impact your long-term financial picture. And if it doesn't go well, and this is where I think the trepidation comes from, rightfully so, I think, from physician groups, if it doesn't go well, the ramifications can be large and have a negative impact on not just your ability to practice medicine the way you want, but also on your financial future. And
Right.
so making sure that you get the right people in the conversation, get all of the issues on the table, right? If you can have a productive conversation with the more seasoned doctors, with the younger doctors, get all the issues, all the concerns, all of that on the table, and then have a really good attorney, have a good consultant who can help you wrap that all up and say, this is the partner we're looking for. This is how we're going to structure the deal. And if we can make all of that align, this should work for you. Because to your point, there are doctors that have been in these deals for 10 plus years and are achieving a lot of financial success.
Literally generational wealth, Lauren. No, I agree. I always tell the med school folks that I talk to, or the younger doctors in fellowship. I mean, I think it's your honor to embrace this because it's going to be part of your vernacular. And I'm fascinated that, you'll spend X on med school, but you won't spend Y on a deal flow attorney. It's like, wait a minute, guys. This doesn't make any sense. But I think this generation of physicians has so much opportunity because you do have private equity, you have big strategics coming into healthcare, you have, obviously hospitals doing things that are very interesting. So this could be a real opportunity to invest in your future if you get educated. And it shouldn't be a trepidation or a fear. It should be embracing the future. And, I always say, if you put your head in the sand, it just means the sand is going to keep coming.
Yeah.
It's a really good opportunity to embrace these themes because it only makes the whole practice of medicine more interesting with investable capital. And generational wealth should happen for doctors. I'm a huge proponent of that. So they should be talking to people like you, talking to people like me, and then deciding what the best way is, what the best vehicle is for them to get there.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think that's a great place to leave our conversation for today. I know I've learned quite a bit. Some of these were questions that I've had, like, how does this really work? And how does this? And a lot of the questions that I asked you actually came directly from physicians that we have worked with over time, because this is becoming something commonplace that doctors do encounter. I love your approach of make an intentional decision, right? Like, get all of the information, get yourself educated, make a good decision. If that's staying independent, that's staying independent. That's great. You can be confident, you know what's out there, and that's the best path forward for you and your partners. If that's partnering with the hospital system, if that's entering a private equity deal, there are pros and cons to all of those paths forward. And then there are some other things like joint ventures and things we didn't even get into today. There are an abundance of options. I think changing the perspective and looking at it as opportunity, right? Looking at it as there are good solutions out there if you're educated enough to ask good questions, or you can pay the right people to help you get to that end. Right. Then you can be confident that you've chosen a good path forward for yourself and you understand the different things that you could entertain then maybe 2 to 5 years down the road. Like, oh, when we get to this point, this could make a lot of sense for us. And I love the confidence that could bring, because, I mean, what you said earlier is so true. The stress on individual physician practice, like private practice physicians right now, is more, in my experience, than I have seen in the 15 years that I've been working with physicians. And so I think understanding that there are options and understanding that there are people who can help and to build that great team is really great advice. So I so appreciate your insights, Dana. Do you have any parting words?
No, I think you nailed it, Lauren. I mean, hopefully people will listen to this and similar things to this. I think there needs to be more of this out in the marketplace, just educating folks that they can get in long before you get married. You need to be educated about what that means. So no, I think staying involved and continuing to evolve your mindset about what the future of healthcare looks like is just so critical for our doctors as they move forward in their career. So no, thanks for hosting this and for offering education. It's so important to have this stuff out.
Oh, of course. I mean, that's where it all starts, right? Sometimes it's just, hey, I went to this thing and this person mentioned this, and that's where it all starts. So, I mean, that's how you and I met. So
that's right.
I so appreciate you being here. Again, this is one I was looking forward to for a long time. For all of you listening, hopefully you took as much away from this as I did, and this was a really valuable episode for you with really great insights. Please do follow Doctor's Eyes Only. Please subscribe so you don't miss any of our great future episodes that we have coming. And until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Doctor's Eyes Only podcast. We hope today's conversation advanced your journey toward wealth that matters. Make sure to follow and subscribe so you don't miss a single one of our amazing episodes. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Vestia Advisors, LLC. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. It should not be construed as legal or tax advice and is not intended to replace the advice of a qualified attorney or tax advisor. This information is not an offer or a solicitation to buy or sell securities. Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Before investing, you should consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses associated with investment products. Investment decisions should be based on an individual's own goals, time horizon, and tolerance for risk. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Diversification and asset allocation do not ensure a profit or guarantee against loss. Consult your financial professional before making any investments. Investment advisory services offered through Vestia Personal Wealth Advisors, Vestia Retirement Plan Consultants, and Vestia Advisors LLC. Securities offered through Osdale Financial Partners, Inc., 5187 Utica Ridge Road, Davenport, Iowa, 52807. Member, FINRA, SIPC. Vestia Personal Wealth Advisors, Vestia Retirement Plan Consultants, Vestia Advisors LLC, and Osdale Financial Partners, Inc. are independently owned and operated.